to study. She is co-leader of the Bergen Passaic chapter and co-chair of the Glenrock Shade Tree Advisory Committee. She has a horticultural practice in Bergen County where she advises clients on sustainability and designs gardens focused on native plants. Our April meeting will be Randy Eckel on native edibles, and hopefully we can find out more about buying plants from Randy. I'm sure she'll do something where we can order them online or something along that lines. The Native Plant of New Jersey lecture is on 4/21st. That's spring ephemerals. Related to that, Mount Cuba has a number of courses on trilliums and other ephemerals. If you have a day and you can spend maybe 2 or 3 hours taking a class, it is incredible to see these ephemerals because it's one of the few places you can still see them since deer have eaten them all around this area. The Westchester Community College, their plant sale is on to March 31st. Native Plant Society of New Jersey dues are $20. You can also join a trail conference. And Habitat Helpers should start the end of March or early April. So if people are eager to get their hands dirty again, that'll be starting up soon. Now I'm going to let it go to Elaine.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I'm going to be talking tonight about more than native plants. I'm particularly going to be talking about how we can all make our gardens more sustainable. I like to say greener and cheaper too, because I'm going to mostly tell you not to do things that you might be spending money on. I'd like you to pay attention to this guy or lady right here. This is a spicebush swallowtail, I believe a female. I'm not a butterfly expert, but I'm going to call her Susie Swallowtail. And when she pops up in this presentation, and she's going to pop up a lot, you're going to know that there's something that you should be doing that will help the butterflies and other creatures that you want to encourage in your garden. So here we go. Now, I'm a little bit at a disadvantage here. When I do this program in person, I of course would show you these two pictures and I would ask you to tell me which garden you think is more sustainable. So just look at these two pictures for a minute and tell me without defining sustainability yet, which one you think is more sustainable. These, by the way, are two adjoining backyards. They're right next to each other. In the real world. So just look at them for a second and tell me which one you think might be more sustainable based on whatever definition you have in your head right now of what sustainability means. Okay, we're going to see them again later. So let's move on again now. Okay, so sustainability basically means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So in other words, it means using fewer non-renewable resources and using them more wisely, using them as wisely as possible. The non-renewable resources that I'm talking about are primarily water. Fresh water is a very precious natural resource, and it's quite limited. And also petroleum-based products, which include chemical fertilizers and fuels and all the pesticides and herbicides that we use. Those are just, they're manufactured products and they're quite not, they are all non-renewable. Just as an example of some things that I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is actually, it's right around the corner from where I live. And this picture was taken around the beginning of September after a hot summer. And you can see that the lawn on this side is being watered as it is. It's watered all the time. And this lawn is nice and green. The lawn right here is not watered and it's brown. The next week, and unfortunately I should have taken a picture, but I didn't. The next week it rained and this lawn was just as green as this lawn. So this family had been wasting water all summer long to keep lawn green, when what lawn wants to do is to go brown in the summer, because lawn grasses are cool season grasses that really can't take our hot summers. So it wants to go dormant and then it wants to green up again as soon as it gets warmer, as soon as you get some rain or the weather cools off. And we're going to talk about lawn care a little bit later. Again, non-renewable resources, pesticides, herbicides, all kinds of stuff, fertilizers, all made from petroleum, all non-renewable. This is what we're doing. This plume of algae is coming out of the Delaware, it's coming out of the Hudson, it's coming off the New Jersey coast. This is from agriculture, but the agriculture it's from is lawns. We don't have a lot of agriculture in New Jersey. We have some, but lawn care is responsible for all of this massive overthrow of nitrogen and other fertilizers. So, and it's what it's actually doing is visible in the ocean. So let's have a model of a sustainable garden to keep in our minds. And again, this is the kind of garden that Susie would like to make her home in. This is a kind of a schematic picture that was done by a town in Australia, but it's an excellent, doesn't show our kinds of plants, but it's an excellent schematic for what a sustainable habitat is, a natural habitat. So if you notice, you have plants of different levels. You have tall canopy trees, you have mid-story or what we call understory trees and shrubs, and you have ground cover. And also in the ground cover, you have rocks, you have some detritus, in other words, dead fallen leaves, maybe some dead wood, and a water feature. You have a great variety of plants, which is going to lead to a great variety of animals. So if you look at this backyard, one, obviously, I'm sure everybody realized this was the more sustainable of the two backyards that I showed you. It has all of these features. On my screen, the little cameos of me and Tom are covering part of this. I'm sorry if that's the case for you too. You may have it side by side, but back here, there is a little water feature. It's just a bird bath, but you could have a small pond, or you could have the kind of thing that keeps the ice melted in winter or anything like that. But there's water. There's plenty of place for humans, but there's tall trees. There are shrubs. There are perennials, and as you can see, there's lots of food for birds here. They're also back here. This was all planted, by the way. This little forest was all planted about 25 years ago, and the ground under it is never cleared or treated or gardened in any way. The leaves just fall. So that is a model to keep in mind. If you have this kind of a garden with all these pieces in place, you're going to see Susie and her friends. You're going to see butterflies, you're going to see birds, you're going to see fireflies, and all those things that we all like to see. Oh dear. Sorry about that. I should have taken it out of here. Okay, let's move on. So keep all these pieces in your minds as we go through tonight. The first, I'm going to talk about 3 different types of things that you can do to make your garden more sustainable. The first one is leave the leaves. Then I'm going to talk about composting. Then I'm going to talk about lawn care. And at the end, just for a few minutes, I'm going to talk about planting native plants, because I'm assuming that this group is already sold on the idea of planting native plants. So leave your leaves. Leaves are a renewable resource, and they're valuable in your garden in many, many ways. Why leave your leaves? If you want to think about your garden as a habitat, as a natural place, you have to realize that in a habitat, in a forest, the leaves remain. When my kids were growing up, I would sometimes lead Cub Scouts through the woods in places around here. And I would always ask them, what happened to last year's leaves? And what I found at the time, this is 25 years ago, is that the kids had no idea. Today, when I lead kids through the Glenrock Arboretum, which I do very often, they know what happened to last year's leaves. It's great. What happened to last year's leaves, of course, is that they broke down and they turned into soil. That's what happens to leaves. But in the meantime, so if you take your leaves away from under your trees, you're taking away your soil. You're basically throwing away the richness of your soil. But also what happens if you keep your leaves is all these creatures live in them. You will have all kinds of soil microorganisms that are functioning to break down the leaves and to turn them into rich soil. Birds will sift through them. In my garden, I have flocks of birds that come through in the winter, and they sift through the leaves. They actually throw them up in the air because they're looking for insects, the insects that are harbored underneath. You will see moths and butterflies because a lot of them overwinter in the leaf litter. When you throw away your leaves, you're throwing away all of that life. So that's why you leave your leaves. And here are some things you can do with your leaves when you keep them. You can use them as lawn fertilizer. They make excellent fertilizer. We'll talk about that in 1 second. You can use them as mulch. You can use them to make compost, which is another section of this talk. And you can use them just to create habitat in your garden. So first of all, leaves are free fertilizer for your lawn. This is not the very best thing to do with your leaves, because when you chop up your leaves, what you do is you just run your mower over them. When you chop up your leaves, you're actually chopping up some butterfly larvae and pupae too. So it's not the absolute best thing to do. I would not suggest you do this with all of your leaves, but you can, but when you do chop them, they will break down into very small pieces. They will disappear into the lawn very close, very quickly, and that will be releasing all the nutrients that are stored in those leaves. That's fertilizer. It's free. So that's one thing that you can do with your leaves. Just run your mower over them and it will chop them. Another thing is that leaves are free mulch. So if you very gently rake or blow the leaves from your lawn onto your garden beds, allow the leaves that fall on your shrubs, just kind of shake them so they fall into the ground, and that's your mulch. It doesn't make sense to me personally to watch in the fall when people hire people to blow all their leaves away, and then they pay them to do that, and then they pay them to mulch. The mulch is already there. Just leave the leaves. That's your mulch. It works beautifully. It works for any kind of garden bed. Your trees, your shrubs, perennials, vegetables, anything you grow can be mulched with leaves. And Susie will be very happy for it, because her larvae, her pupae, will be there lying in the dead leaves all winter long, and then she will emerge in spring. So you will see, if you do this, you'll see not only butterflies and moths, but you'll see fireflies too, because they also live in the, a lot of creatures, very important creatures live in this layer, this very important layer that we tend to remove. So leave your leaves as free mulch. Save your leaves to use in compost throughout the year. There are a bunch of different ways to do it. This happens to be my leaf pile when it's not quite complete yet in the fall. I just rake all the leaves that fall in my backyard into a narrow strip, and then I'm going to use them in compost all year long. This is the leaf pile of somebody that I know, and she has, as you can see, she has simply strung some chicken wire between some poles, and then they just put the leaves in there just to contain them. I find when I do this, they don't blow around. They pretty much stay where I put them all winter, and then I can use them to put into my compost all year. So once the leaves sort of get wet and they get compressed a little, they stay put. You don't have problems with them blowing all over your yard. So save your leaves to use in compost. And finally, save your leaves even if you don't make compost, because it creates habitat for many, many, many wild creatures, particularly for, as they break down, particularly you will have the microorganisms that improve your soil naturally. Again, if you do this, if you have a little area that you just kind of leave alone in your backyard, you will have, Susie will be there, and she will thank you. I want to stop here. If there are any questions about leaving the leaves. I'm sorry, I should have said that you should write your questions in the chat, I guess, which I can't see now. Somebody's raising a hand. I'm not sure how to see that. Tom, can you see that? Somebody's raising a hand. I think you're muted, Tom.
Just unmuted.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
Hear me?
Yes. Are there, I should have told people to write their questions in the chat. People are raising their hands. Oh, yes, there are things, there are here.
Can I get that back?
I can see them actually. So somebody is asking if it's, let me start at the beginning. Here we go. Should you leave Norway maple leaves? And the question is yes. Norway maples are not as poisonous as you've been told they are, but they're not great trees. But yes, you should use the leaves of all trees. For many years, those were the only trees I had, and I've been using Norway maple leaves for many years. So yes. Somebody wants to know, is it safe? When is it safe to move leaves, or when have the larvae emerged? Generally, this is kind of true for all kind of garden cleanup. I wait, I'm going to talk about this. I think I'm going to talk about this later. You don't do a lot of garden cleanup until it's really spring. So what I do is I kind of look to see if a lot of my perennials are showing new growth, and that tells me that I can clean up my garden beds, because I leave the leaves that fall in my garden beds, and then I'm eventually going to rake those off, and I'm going to take them to my town compost because I don't have enough room from in my own compost. So I hope that answers that question. And how do you find a landscaper to do this if you're not able to do it yourself? And I guess I'm lucky enough to have a husband who'll do this for me. And I also, raking is great exercise. So I do rake myself manually. I rake the leaves. And I would imagine that if you're willing to pay somebody to do it, they'll do it for you. It might be a teenage boy who lives in the neighborhood more than a landscaper, because they're certainly, what they want to do is put all your leaves out on the curb. I would imagine that if you tell somebody to do it, they're going to do it for you.
I know but landscapers will blow the leaves into the woods.
Yes, they'll definitely do that. Yeah. Yeah. What about pests in the leaves close to the house? I'm not sure what you mean by pests. This does not attract vermin like rats and mice. It simply does not. There are the insects that are living there are things like the larvae of moths and butterflies, and they don't want to come in your house. So you don't get more bugs in your house if you do this kind of thing. I don't pile the leaves up right against my house, because of course you might have flooding and leaking. You don't want to have a big pile of wet leaves right up against the wall of your house. If there's any kind of a crack, you're going to get moisture. So I certainly wouldn't do that. But you don't have pests in the leaves. They don't track pests. Is it okay? Sure, rake them up in early spring. Somebody's asking, is it okay to rake in early spring? She leaves the leaves all winter. I would wait until, as I said, if you want to get rid of them, I would wait until the weather warms up. Not until, not just when, like now, it's way too early to do any kind of garden cleanup now, because all of those creatures that take refuge, the leaves are certainly still there now. Remember, it's still pretty cold at night, and it's probably going to get cold again during the daytime. Do I recommend using a mulcher to give the flower beds a more aesthetic look? It would have that effect, but you'd also be killing all those larvae. If you shred the leaves, you're going to kill the creatures that live in the leaves. So once you pile them up, once you've had a rain, they of course, it doesn't look quite as pretty. But right now, it's March now, and the leaves have been in place since last November. They're pretty much all just a layer. There's like a sort of monotone layer now. So that's that I wouldn't recommend shredding your leaves. So same question. No, I do not think that shredding the leaves is necessary. Okay, so somebody's asking, the leaves will stay in the backyard over the winter, and then in the spring, I would rake them. If so, what would be the best time to clean out the leaves in the backyard? If you're making compost, you need those leaves. You never want to get rid of them. In fact, you're going to run out of leaves in August and September, and you're going to be frantically looking for more. So you don't really get rid of them. If you're using them as mulch, or if you're using them as habitat, no, you don't want to get rid of them. you just want to leave them. The plants that are going to be coming up, if you have spring ephemerals growing, the plants are going to come up right through the leaves. You don't have to move anything aside. So you really don't want to remove them if you're using them for compost, if you're using them for mulch, if you're using them just to create habitat, leave them. If you let them lie on your lawn, and I don't recommend that people let a thick layer of leaves remain on their lawn, because that will kill the lawn. If you have a layer of leaves so thick that the grass can't poke through to get light, it will kill the lawn. So unless there's an area of lawn you want to kill, don't do that. Either rake them off or do mow over them. You know, maybe you want to mow over some of them and leave most of them. So I think that's it about leaves. And I'm going to move on. Thank you for your questions. Okay, making compost. So compost is basically what happens if you leave a pile of leaves and don't do anything to it. It's not something that requires any effort at all on the part of the humans. I think people tend to overthink compost. It's really a perfectly natural process. And so you go from this to this, really with no effort at all. So let's talk about what that entails. All you need to make compost is an out-of-the-way place for the compost piles or for your bin, if you're using some kind of a closed system. You need brown material to provide carbon, and that's primarily leaves. You need a leaf rake or a blower to put the leaves where you want them to be. And you need a place to store leaves before you put them in your compost. Optional equipment is a spading fork to turn the compost, and I never turn my compost. It makes the pile cook faster, but I never do it. We use a piece of 1/2 inch chicken wire attached to a frame, and we do screen our compost. And you need you can use, but you do not need green material to provide nitrogen. And the green material can be weeds, can be your kitchen scraps, it can be lawn trimmings. We'll look at that in a second. And you may want to use a compost bin or some other kind of closed system. These are my compost piles right here. This area is about 6 feet by 6 feet. So if you look at it, it's hard. I know it's hard to see, but it actually is divided right down the center into 2 separate piles they're just right up against each other. This pile at the moment is cooking. It's done. We've done all the layers probably for somewhere between 4 and 6 months, and it's sitting there just maturing. It's literally cooking because compost actually develops a lot of heat. This is the pile, the active pile that we're adding to. So what we're doing is we're putting our kitchen scraps in it, and then once a week, I'm raking a thick layer of leaves on top of it. So here it is. I think I tried to take these pictures so you could see it with some kitchen scraps on top of it, and you could see it when you then cover it with leaves. This looks like it's in the fall because I can see leaves with nice colors to them. So this is a very simple way to do compost without any kind of equipment whatsoever. Very simple do's and don'ts to compost. But the main reason to do compost is because surprisingly enough, kitchen scraps, the stuff that you can put in your compost, it comprises in different parts of the country anywhere from 15 to 35% of the waste stream, what we all throw away. So it substantially diminishes the municipal waste stream if people start to compost. It also gives you this excellent product that you can use. But what the main thing that you need is the brown material, which is the carbon. The brown material is fallen leaves, sawdust, wood shavings, wood chips, and straw or hay. Brown doesn't actually refer to color. It refers to the fact that it turns darker as it matures. For example, coffee grounds are green material, not brown material. So it doesn't refer to color, it refers to what it is. Green material is kitchen refuse, any kind of vegetable peeling, all vegetable matter. Eggshells, grass clippings, garden debris, or some untreated paper. Not a lot, but some untreated paper. You can put natural fibers such as pet hair in there. I have a very hairy dog, and I brush him outside and I put the hair in the compost. And then I have read that you can use the droppings and the box material from caged indoor animals, such as gerbils or rabbits. What you don't want to use are any animal products. If you eat meat from skin, bones, or dairy, you don't want to use any of that. You don't want to put in any food that contains fats. You don't want to use dog or cat feces. And and you don't want to use any diseased plant material. If you find that you've got a cucumber wilt in your vegetable garden, don't compost those plants, throw them out. And you don't want to put in weeds that have gone to seed. The main reason for most of this, you don't want to put this in, the last three, is that a home compost pile doesn't get hot enough to kill weed seeds or to destroy disease-causing organisms. Commercial compost pile would get much hotter than a home compost pile, because it depends on the size of the amount of heat generated depends on the size of the pile. You don't put in animal products because that's going to attract vermin to your backyard. So don't do that. So do use these, don't use these. There are many, many, many different ways to compost, and I can't possibly talk about them all here, but they all involve layering brown and green material. If you want to just use an open pile like this, I do suggest that it's a double pile, 2 piles, and the reason is that if you had just one and you kept adding to it, you'd never be able to get at the cooked material underneath. So if you have, this one, as I said, this one is resting, it's cooking, and we can then use it. This one we're adding to, and then when we use this one, we'll cap this one off with a nice thick layer of leaves and start to make a new pile here. There are many kinds of closed bin systems. This is the kind where you put material in at the top and you scoop the compost out at the bottom. This is a kind where you rotate it and to mix it up. And some of these will give you compost tea out the bottom. Some people use a 3-bin system, and you could read about all of these online. I'm going to, okay, so using the compost. You know that the compost is done because it smells good. It doesn't smell like, used kitchen material anymore. It has this nice clean, it's dark brown and a uniform color and consistency, and it has this nice earthy smell. And you'll also be able to see very few identifiable objects left in it. Some things may have to go through more than once. I find avocado pits and corn cobs and peach pits. You will always find them when we sift it, and we'll just put them back in to, eventually they do break down. You can use the compost in your vegetable garden. You can spread it on your lawn. You can use it anywhere you want to improve the soil. When you do use it, you don't want to dig it into the soil. You want to put it just on top, and then the earthworms and the other soil organisms will mix it for you. They'll put it all in the right, they'll put everything at the right level. If you mix it, you're putting all the critters at the wrong level, and they all have to worry about getting back to the right place again. So this is just a little vegetable plot that I have in our community garden. And what I do is every time we screen a load of compost, I just spread it on top. And that's the only thing that I use my compost for. Questions about compost? Now, I managed to open the chat before.
And then
Okay. Does the compost pile require sunlight? It doesn't really. It will probably break down faster if it's in the sun. Mine is tucked away in a spot where it probably gets a few hours of sun. It's not terribly important whether it gets sun or shade. It probably, if it's in the sun, it'll probably cook a little bit faster. You want it in an out of the way place because it's not terribly pretty to look at. Mine is only about 20 feet from my patio, but it's tucked away, so you can't see it. Other questions about composting before we go on? Good, okay. Okay, sustainable lawn care. This is a passionate thing with me, lawn care. I can truly say that one of my goals in life, now that my children are grown, is to eliminate lawn, and that's what I do with my gardening practice. I try to eliminate lawn. So to make your lawn more sustainable, what you want to do is to do less. You want to do much less to your lawn than you're doing right now. Okay, it's a lot of stuff here. Just lots and lots of facts about how terrible lawns are. The main thing about lawns is that they are just a sink of unsustainability. They produce 4 times more CO2 than they absorb. So they are, because of all the things we put into them, the fertilizers and the pesticides and the watering and the mowing and the leaf blowing and the other practices we do, we actually, our lawns wind up producing 4 times as much greenhouse gas as they absorb as green plants. As we know, all green plants do absorb CO2, but lawns give off 4 times more than they absorb. So they are terrible, terrible, terrible for the environment. I'm not going to go through all of this. I would suggest you do a little research on this, and you'll see really why lawns are very bad. Most of us have much more lawn than we need. We can reduce it, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. We spend a lot of money on lawns, and most of what we do is not terribly useful, and really doesn't do very much good for the lawn either. They actually cover 20% of New Jersey is lawns. I mean, wouldn't it be great if 20% of New Jersey were native habitat? But it's not, it's lawn. Standard grass lawns use more equipment, labor, fuel, and toxins than agricultural farming. We spend an incredible amount of money and time on this. We create terrible noise levels with the machines that we use. The runoff does a great deal of damage to the environment. Yard waste is estimated to make up 20 to 50% of US landfills. Probably a lot of that is leaves. So again, if you keep your leaves, you're helping in a lot of levels. Gas-powered lawn equipment in particular is particularly bad because it doesn't have any of the regulation that car engines have. So it emits much more of all of these very nasty gases than electric lawnmowers would, or than cars do. So tons and tons of nitrogen oxides, of hydrocarbons, of carbon monoxide, and twice the CO2 per hour of operation than if you can use electric equipment. So that's one of the things that can do. So I would just encourage you to think about what you do in your lawn, and I'm going to talk about some specifics, but to think about it and to think about how you might be able to do it in a more sustainable way. So here are some suggestions. Most of the water that we put on our lawns is pretty much wasted, aside from the fact that some people water when it's raining, and they water when it's in bright sunshine, and they water during the rain, and they water at all the wrong times. But they water very frequently and very shallowly. So the water is never helping the plant to make strong roots. This is a diagram that actually comes from a sprinkler manufacturer to show how to do it, and it is correct. What most people do is they run their sprinklers for just a few minutes every day or every other day. When we have water restrictions I live in Glenrock and Ridgewood, we'll have alternate day watering. So they'll run their sprinklers maybe 15 minutes every other day. And what that gives you is a very, very small amount of water. And what that does to the plant is it encourages it to create very, very shallow roots. If you run your sprinkler for a longer time, up to deliver to the plants as much as an inch a week of water at one time, you will develop very healthy root systems, and the plant will need much less watering. They'll be able to survive drought periods. They'll be stronger and much more healthy. You probably have no idea how long it takes you for your sprinkler, or whether you're talking about a sprinkler, an in-ground sprinkler system or an oscillating sprinkler, to deliver an inch of water. And I would bet that it's a lot more time than you think. If you would, the way to know how long it takes to get an inch of water, and this is crucial for watering many kinds of plants, is you put a container on the ground, put a cat food can on the ground. You don't need a little water meter, but you can get those too. Put a container on the ground while your sprinkler is running and see how long it takes to get an inch of water in it. And I would bet you that it's at least an hour. And I would also bet you that you never water for that long at a time. So infrequent but deep watering, much better for all plants than frequent but shallow watering. You'll also use less water. Better yet, even better yet, and I know most people don't believe me, is stop watering. Lawns don't need water. It's natural for lawns to go dormant in hot weather, as this one has. Showed you this picture before. This lawn did what it was meant to do in a hot summer, which is go dormant. It's not dead. As soon as it rains, this is going to be just as green as this. So our lawn grasses are not grasses that are native to this continent. They are native to areas like Northern Europe that's much cooler and wetter than our climate is. So they're adapted. They're called cool season grasses, and in hot weather, they simply go dormant. The watering is just keeping them growing artificially. You can also retrofit your sprinkler system so you don't water the hardscape and waste a lot of water that way. I should have a picture of this, and I'm sorry I don't, but most sprinklers like this one are meant to cover a very, very wide area. So when you put in a sprinkler system, you put in as few of these heads as possible, and that does save money, but it also wastes money every time you water, because if you had, I would bet you, sorry, I can't see it because my little vignettes are over, but there's probably another sprinkler head right here. And that sprinkler head is watering the sidewalk and out into the street. As you can see, the sidewalk is right here. It not only drives people who want to walk on the sidewalk out into the street, which is not nice, but it's wasting a lot of water. So you can retrofit your sprinkler system with a few more very small sprinkler heads, even right along this median strip, and that will water just the grass and not the hardscape. That's another way to save water. Again, this is what irresponsible watering and an overuse of fertilizers is doing to our oceans. Lawn chemicals, they're just not necessary, and all of the pesticides and fungicides and herbicides we use, they are unnecessary. They pollute our water, and they're harmful to humans and pets and wildlife. Learn to tolerate some clover or some violets in your lawn. They're pretty. Grass is not particularly pretty, but the flowers that grow amongst it are nice and pretty. So learn to tolerate some things that you might think of as weeds. And also fertilizer. In general, plants have been making their own food for about 400 million years, which is long before humans came along. Plants make their own food. That's what they do. They're the basis of all of the food that is produced on Earth. They don't need plant food. They don't need fertilizer. If you feel that you must, so most of these systems, the Scott's 4-step and all that stuff, it's basically putting all of these chemicals, particularly the fertilizers, right into our water system, and it's causing these algal blooms. That's what's causing the toxic lakes. It's what's causing all of the when you see a bright green pond like that, that's what's causing it. There is the best practice, if you feel that you must fertilize your lawn, is to apply once a year, and preferably in early fall, use a slow-acting organic fertilizer, because most of the synthetic fertilizers are very quick-acting. They're very volatile. Nitrogen is extremely volatile, both in water and in air. So most of what you put down is just, it's going up into the air, or it's going down into the water system immediately. If you use a slow-acting organic fertilizer, and you don't need to do it more than once a year, your soil will thank you. All of these chemicals are also literally killing your soil. They are destroying the soil structure, which is the term that's used for the way all of the components of the soil work together. Most of the components of a healthy soil is living organisms, microorganisms that we can't see. And these chemical fertilizers are chemically, they are salts, and they're killing all those organisms. So your soil is literally dead if you've been using these things. So if your soil is literally dead, Susie's going to have a terrible time in your backyard, as are fireflies. I would bet you if you stop using all these things and you start letting your soil recover, you'll start to see fireflies again. I would bet you that you'll see more of all kinds of beneficial insects, and you'll certainly see more birds if you start to do this. And remember, it's hard to remember this because our properties are not self-contained. We think of them as self-contained, but they're not. Anything you apply to your lawn flows into the water system. If you have a stream nearby, that's where it's going, and it's being carried to nearby lakes and into the bay and into the Hudson River. So you just need to remember that that to the Passaic and then into the Hudson River. I'm a New Yorker, I think in terms of the Hudson, but here it's going in right into the Passaic River, which goes into the bay. So you want to you want to think about that too when you are treating your lawn. But the main thing is that these things are not necessary. Just a few more things, sustainable techniques about lawns. And again, Susie's going to thank you for all of these things. Mulch while you mow. If you get rid of your grass clippings, even if you compost them, don't leave them on the lawn. That's nitrogen, that's fertilizer. So just take the bag off your mower. You don't need a special mulching mower. Take the bag off your mower, and as you mow, let the clippings just lie on the lawn. They will break down very, very quickly, and that's fertilizer in the lawn. Use electric powered rather than gas powered equipment. It's getting better all the time. So the next time you have to replace your mower or your blower or your snow blower, get an electric powered one. And they really are getting better all the time. Let the grass grow long. Set the mower blades as high as they'll go, and it's about 3 inches. The longer grass can carry out more photosynthesis. It can grow healthier and stronger. Don't try to grow grass where grass will not grow. A lot of landscapers will tell you that if you have moss, you should put down lime because that will take care of it. The reason you have moss is that you have shade, and lime will not get rid of shade. So that is a fallacy. There's nothing you can do. Lawn grasses are plants of sun. They need sunny sites, and they need not very wet sites. So if you have an extremely wet area, or if you have a very shady area, don't try to grow grass there. It's not going to grow there. So just as an example, this is a moss lawn. This is obviously, I just took this picture off of the internet, but it's obviously a very, very shady site, and grass is not going to grow there. So they've just encouraged the natural moss to grow, and they've left it alone, and I think it looks great. Eliminate some lawn. It's an enormous selection of beautiful native plants that you can plant instead. So this is just a little bit of a shade garden in an area of my backyard that used to be lawn. It's under a neighbor's Norway maple tree, and there's nothing I can do with it. So I planted some shade-loving natives there. All of my gardens used to be lawn. I have pretty extensive perennial gardens in both sun and shade, and they all used to be lawn areas. You could also, if you have a sunny area, you could make a vegetable garden. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the end. So eliminate some lawn. If you have areas that, if your kids are grown up, or if you have areas that you never use, just leave the part of your lawn that you walk across or that your kids play on. Everything else can be planted, and very attractively. It'll have much less maintenance, and it will be much, much better for the environment. Questions about lawn care? Let's see, Tom, can you open the chat?
Let me just get on chat.
Yes, okay. You wanna read them to me?
All right. My garden plants are also the sprinkler system. Can I water?
Or what the sprinkler? Are what?
My
I'm not-
garden beds are also the sprinkler system,
I don't
Can-
understand what you're
like
saying.
1 inch per week. Not sure what that means.
Yeah, hang on a second.
Maybe she meant.
Oh, somebody, oh, Diane is here. Hi, Diane. And she says that Susie is a female spice bush butterfly. I thought so. Thank you, Diane. Okay, we have, oh, there's more questions about compost now. Maybe we'll go back to those at the end. My garden beds are also the sprinkler system.
I think that
Okay, I guess what she means is that I guess what you mean is that the sprinkler is getting onto your garden bed. So can you water your plants 1 inch a week? You can, but you don't need to. So that's one reason perhaps to retrofit your sprinkler system so it doesn't extend quite as far. So the heads don't extend quite as far. You can certainly water just about anything 1 inch per week, and it's not gonna hurt it. I would suggest watering everything less. If you have native plants that are correctly sited, they should almost never need water after they're established. So if you're watering your lawn and you're watering all those plants, you are probably wasting some water. Okay, how do you get rid of crabgrass and other weeds? Well, I don't, but crabgrass is an annual. If it really, really bothers you, I have to admit it bothers me not in the slightest. If it really, really bothers you, it's an annual. As soon as you see it, pull it up. Don't let it go to seed, and then you won't have any crabgrass anymore. You know, you probably will take a couple of years to exhaust the seed stock in the soil, but if you keep doing that, you're not going to have crabgrass anymore. I would not do anything to get rid of violets. There's lots of little flowering things that grow through our lawns. Some of them are not native, but still they're going to attract pollinators. I wouldn't do anything about that. If weeds really bother you, well, weeding is good exercise. If you can, do it that way. It's much less disturbing. I certainly wouldn't pour anything on them. I wouldn't use herbicides. You can, that's what I have to say about weeds. You learn how to dig up particular weeds. If you really want to get rid of dandelions, you know that you have to get the whole taproot. So there's different ways to attack different things. I do dig out dandelions in my flower beds, but I don't dig them out of my lawn. So if there are no other questions about, thank you for that verification, Diane, about the female. I thought it was a female spice bush swallowtail, but I wasn't absolutely sure. I'm going to go back to the composting questions at the end. There are some here that we didn't get before, but I'm going to go on because we're almost done, and then I'll go back to all of those questions. Okay. So another thing you can do that Susie will appreciate very much is to plant in sustainable ways. And this involves even more than going native. As you know, we are a chapter of the Native Plant Society, and we like to talk about native plants, and we like to encourage you to grow native plants. But I figured that on this once, most people here would already be convinced of that, so I could talk about some other aspects of sustainability. So just to go back to what a sustainable garden is, layers. If you have tall trees, make a nice mulch island around them, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute, and plant it. Plant the shrubs that go with your trees, plant the understory that goes with your trees, and eliminate some lawn that way. You can have an area where you just, as I said, this is all planted. And we never do anything here, except I do walk through it a couple of times a year because I have to pull Norway maple seedlings and English ivy seedlings in here because I have a neighbor who has allowed English ivy to go berserk. And then there are still some Norway maple trees around. So you do have to do some weeding, but something like this, which used to be lawn, requires absolutely no maintenance except maybe 2 passes through it to weed it in the course of the year. You can look at the trees that are already growing. If you have like an area, very often on the border of a property, There'll be a lot of new trees growing up. They just kind of seeded in. Cull those, look at those, ID them, and keep the native ones and get rid of the non-native ones. And you've got the beginning of a forest all for free. If you let a little area of grass grow long, you will probably have all kinds of perennials coming up in it too, because again, the seeds are in the soil. It's also, I found when I was first doing this, and I did let some grass, when we first planted these, they were very, very tiny. So the grass did grow up around them. And I told my neighbors what I was doing so they wouldn't report me to the weed law people. But so the grass grew very long, and I found that the rabbits liked that very long grass, and they left some of my plants alone because they like that so much. But it does tend to be where the animals will congregate rather than, totally leave my gardens alone, obviously. But there are a lot of benefits to getting rid of lawn. So again, keep this in mind, all the layers. So eliminate areas of lawn that you don't use or that don't look good. This was a friend of mine who told me that the lawn was always sparse. She has a very large property, and she has trees, big trees scattered around. And she said, oh, the lawn under the trees is always sparse. It never looks good. And no matter who I hire and no matter what they do, the lawn still looks bad. And I said, well, of course it does, because it's shady. It's too shady for lawn. So we mulched a big area. As you can see, we did it in other areas too. We mulched a very big area, and then she planted it. Now, she didn't plant what I necessarily would have liked her to plant, but she planted it. It looks much better now. You can see this was the area that originally was mulched around this tree, and then this is the area that we mulched. So she got rid of a lot of lawn that was kind of driving her crazy. And if you can imagine, you could have a lovely native shade garden under here. You could put in, you could put in ferns and all kinds of native flowering plants that would look lovely here. This is an area of perennial border it's in full sun, and it was lawn. So what we did was we created a couple of perennial borders, and we joined them with patio. And it was all just lawn. It was very, very hot. So now the land is productive, and it has all kinds of pollinators and birds and other kinds of critters, whereas before it was just lawn. You can also very productively do a small vegetable garden. I like this one because it was in a series of boxes, and it's a very neat way to do it. But you could easily, if you have a sunny area of lawn, you could easily turn it into a vegetable garden. So just a few things: tree islands, perennials and native grasses, vegetable gardens. Any place you have a tree, mulch around it, and then gradually plant into it. You don't have to do it all at once. If you have two trees further apart, mulch between them, and then create let the things join, and then you'll eliminate more and more lawn as that island gets bigger. It will look very attractive. Plant native, of course, and mass your plantings. The idea of planting so that you have a sea of mulch, and then a plant here and a plant here. Well, it's not doing anything for the environment. You're going to have a lot of runoff when it rains. You're going to have it's not hiding the animals. It's not doing all that kind of thing. So put your plants close together. Have a lot of plants close together. You can start off with very small ones, very inexpensively, and they will fill in very quickly if you start with healthy plants. Again, Susie and her friends will be very happy in a habitat like this. This is not spice bush, but actually this is spice bush. Right here. This is spice bush. The yellow. It turns a beautiful yellow in the fall, and that's what Susie's caterpillars can eat. So again, just plant native perennials, native grasses. These are all for sun, trees and shrubs. This actually is an area between two houses, so it's providing screening. You can see it's planted in understory trees and in some lower shrubs and perennials, so layers and massed plantings. And that's it. So again, if you have questions, if you, okay. So somebody asked me, you want to do that, Tom? I want to go back to the compost questions too. There's a question right at the end. Okay, soil and flower beds. Soil in flower beds, there's two questions about what kind of soil you use in flower beds. If you plant good, tough native perennials, you should be able to simply plant in the soil you have. Again, you're not going to put wetland plants in dry sites or vice versa. You're not going to put sun lovers in shade or vice versa. But unless you're talking about very specialized type of soil, like if you have clay, and we don't tend to have that very much here. Most people have, that I'm familiar with, places, gardens that I've worked on in Bergen County, or worked in, people tend to have either quite sandy soil because they're living in a river bottom, or they have like a more black, mucky wetland soil. So, because a lot of places in this area were originally wetland and should never have been built on, but we won't go into that. But you really shouldn't have to do anything to your soil unless, the only negative example of that is if you really don't have soil at all, you have fill. And sometimes after building, the builder will simply fill in with rubble. And you'll know you have that because you literally can't dig in it. And if that's the case, you're going to have some of that replaced with topsoil and mixed in. But if you can dig in it, you should be able to plant it. There are many, many plants that can do better, that can do well in very, very poor soil. Native plants don't need mineral rich soil. They actually create soil as they live. I started out gardening with soil that was so sandy, it was like beach sand. It sifted through your fingers. And I've had a prairie there for 25 years. And now I have prairie soil. I have dark black loam because the prairies made the soil, not vice versa. So your plants will improve your soil. So I would not suggest doing anything to your soil, adding to your soil. Native plant sales coming up. The Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College, and that is the correct name of the place. It was in our last mailing. It was in our e-blast that went out on Monday that you probably received. The Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College has a plant sale going on right now. The one at the Native Plant Society of New Jersey is pretty much over. The pickup is this coming weekend, and they were pretty much sold out by last week. Everything sold. It was a very nice one. But the Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College has a plant sale going on right now. You buy your plants online and then you would go there to pick them up. How much weeding do you need to do in summer, or do you leave the weeds? Well, it depends on what you mean by a weed. Very often stuff comes up that I wind up keeping. You never know. I like to think about serendipity in the garden. So things sometimes just come up on their own that once they get big enough that I can ID them, I wind up keeping them. But if your garden is nice and crowded, you're not going to see the weeds. So that's another good reason for having, for massing your plants and having everything very close together. When you're starting a garden, you probably will have to do quite a bit of weeding that first summer until things fill in. But afterwards, there really isn't not much to do. Vegetable gardens, yes, they have to be weeded like mad, but perennial gardens, not so much. I'm going to go back because there were more questions about compost. And they start, okay, sunlight. Oh, how do we screen our compost? So when the compost is nice and cooked, and we know because we dig into it and we see that it's the same all the way through. So we take a rectangular plastic bin that we've had forever, and we put on a table. you know, just right by the compost pile. My husband does this with me. And we put the screen on top of it. We have just a piece of screen that's attached to a wooden frame. We put that on top of it and we dump by the spadeful, we dump the compost onto the screen, and both of us wearing gloves just kind of push it gently through the screen. So my compost is under a tree, so it's going to have twigs in it. So we take those out. The occasional label gets through, the occasional rubber band. So, you know, you throw that out. And then things like peach pits and corn cobs that don't break down the first time, we just throw them back into the compost that's already working. So that's how we do it. My compost is very clumpy. Hard clumps in a rotating dark bin that's in the sun. I spin it off in any ideas. I really do not know very much about composting in bins. If it's clumpy, maybe it's too wet. Tom, do you know anything about this?
No, I don't.
Yeah, maybe
That is
it's too wet. I've never composted in a bin, so I don't really know anything about that. I'm sorry. If anybody else does, type it, please. I think that's all. Okay, please talk to how one uses removal of compost to different. Oh, does the compost have to be baked? No. When it's cooked, it's cooked. It's done. What we do is we, after we screen it, we just put it into some big plastic bins that we use for this purpose, and I take it to my vegetable garden. So no, once it's cooked, you know, it doesn't smell like garbage anymore. It smells like nice, clean earth. It's done. So you can screen it or not screen it. That's up to you. But it's done, and you put it right down on your beds. And as I said, when you use compost, you lay it on top. You don't dig it in. The new information about how to deal with soil of all kinds is to dig as little as possible. You don't want to turn over layers the way people were taught 40, 50 years ago in gardening. You never want to double dig. You never want to turn over layers of soil. You want to just put stuff on top, and it will get mixed in naturally by the work of the soil organisms and other creatures. So it does not have to be, when I say cooked, I mean that natural heating process is going on. It's a natural chemical process that gives off heat. So the compost will be hot, and in the winter, on my open beds, the snow melts over them very quickly. I have to say, this winter was the first time that I ever remember we couldn't get to the compost. And that wasn't because the compost wasn't covered. It was because the leaves that we needed to put on the compost were covered. So we actually couldn't compost for a few weeks until we could get to our leaves again. It was kind of, it was a first for me. We had so much snow this winter. We hadn't had that in a long time. If there are no other questions, we're done. I'm going to stop recording if I can figure that out. Pause recording, stop recording. Yes.